Joining me right now, Kerry Eleveld, who is a senior writer at Daily Kos, comes on our program quite a bit, talks about politics and everything going on, and there certainly is much to talk about. Welcome back to the program, Kerry.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike. So good to be here.
You wrote about Republicans already running scared on abortion and how they should be. And I was so glad you wrote about that because I don't think we're seeing a lot of it in the media coverage. Media instead is talking about, Democrats and Afghanistan and the economy and inflation. Like this is going to be the big issue a year from now. But when that Supreme Court rules in the way it looks like it's going to be an earthquake. Talk a little bit about that.
So you asked about whether or not this is going to be a cataclysmic event. When we think about the Supreme Court and whether it overturns Roe, partially, fully, whatever it does. And I just wanted to say, and you know this as well as I do, that when people have their rights taken away, there's something different about that. And we know that because we both watched it when, on the night Barack Obama was elected in 2008, Proposition 8 passed in California, and same-sex couples statewide were stripped of marital rights. And those were hard-fought rights that people had worked for about a decade or so. And what happened was LGBTQ activists became just adamant, and they weren't going to settle for less when Barack Obama got in the White House, and they became some of the most vehement advocates on the Democratic side, pushing both the White House and Democrats to make progress, finally, on LGBTQ rights. And sure enough, the military's gay ban was repealed. The Obama administration stopped defending the Defense of Marriage Act. Obama made an election year conversion on marriage equality. And in 2013, DOMA was overturned with the help of the Justice Department arguing on our side. And in 2015, we've got the huge marriage decision, right? So I think what people are underestimating, and this is very easy for people to do in D.C., because they're always just kind of thinking about business as usual. And, there's been this abortion fight looming for decades. And I think what they're failing to see is the way this is going to be like a bomb dropping when somewhere around half the states, women lose access to abortion in some form or another.
Yes, and it's horrible. It will take that to happen in order for there to be energy. But I guess it's still just, it still just confounds me that we're not even seeing media coverage talking about this as a major political issue for Republicans.
Yeah, well, and if I were still on Capitol Hill, I would think that reporters would be jumping on this, because what you see when you ask politicians about it on the Republican side is that they don't want to talk about it. I mean, here is Rick Scott being asked if this is an issue that was going to motivate GOP voters in next year's midterms, right? Presumably after there's already been a decision on this this Mississippi law, right? This Mississippi ban. And here's what he says about GOP voters. Quote, they're talking about inflation. They're talking about the border. They're talking about the Afghanistan debacle. They're talking about parental involvement in education. If you look at the polls and what people are caring about, that's what they're focused on. He didn't use the word abortion once in that quote. He basically got out his guns and fired in 15 different directions to try and throw the reporters off the trail of abortion being the issue. That is not someone who wants to talk about the issue of abortion that's what someone who wants to glide straight on past it because it doesn't look like it's going to play very well for them when, somewhere around roughly 2/3 of the country thinks that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And 2/3 is probably a slight undercount. But there isn't certainly more than about 20% support in America for not having abortion access at all. And it's, what Republicans want to go back to and what they're trying to sell is, well, we're just going to let it be decided in the states. Well, if you don't have abortion access in your state and you don't have the money to go out of state, then you don't have abortion access.
And you've got that issue. And then you have, I just saw some polling, 64% from Data for Progress support for the Build Back Better bill, which hasn't passed yet. And Chuck Schumer is promising it's going to pass by the end of the year. And has been a really tough bill for Democrats to even message in terms of what's in it. They've done a better job now, but it's usually after a bill passes that, people really start to absorb what's in it and they feel it. If it's at 64% support now, that is going to be an enormous issue for Democrats to run on. And Republicans are going to be dealing with this abortion issue. I mean, it doesn't look good for them, even as, all the media pundits kind of say it's all a disaster for the Democrats.
Right. Well, so the historical trends are clear and clearly against Democrats in this situation. But as you and I both know, and as your listeners surely know, we are living in ahistorical times. So even though the historical trends of a party with the president in the White House not faring very well, particularly in House races, right? That may not turn out to be such a simple formula this time around, with a real potential gutting of Roe v. Wade, if not an outright overturning of it. That's one thing. Democrats also have some really good things to run on, especially if they get Build Back Better. But even the bipartisan infrastructure bill that most Republicans in the House voted against. And you already see Republicans across the country trying to take credit for things that are coming out of the American Rescue Plan, things that are coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that most Republicans voted against. You see them trying to take credit for these things, right, without mentioning how they've got this $400 million investment in water or whatever it might be. So these are things that Republicans clearly want to be able to run on, and they're just going to lie to people about it unless Democrats call them out on it.
Right. And to those historical trends, yes, the House is very close, and the party, out of power usually does better, the party that's not in the White House, and Republicans have gerrymandered and voter suppression and everything. And, Democrats certainly have a lot going against them, but Republicans are making things easier for Democrats with a lot of these candidates they are backing, particularly when we look at the Senate, where, Mitch McConnell has just caved in and is supporting Herschel Walker in Georgia to try to unseat Raphael Warnock. And then we have David Perdue running. He, of course, lost to John Ossoff in the Senate in the runoff, running for governor. He's going to challenge Brian Kemp. This is all, Brian Kemp is somebody Trump hates now, as Stacey Abrams is really galvanizing that progressive movement she built in Georgia. And David Perdue, I was talking yesterday, we played the ad. He ran that ad that is attacking Kemp, but also Stacey Abrams, that I just thought push so many buttons, like is going to be sending progressives to the polls. Talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the situation in Georgia is horrific for Republicans. I can't believe what a mess it's going to be. And I'll quote a Georgia Republican who anonymously told the Washington Post this about that race between Brian Kemp, the sitting GOP governor, and David Perdue. And he said, or they said, this will be the ugliest, nastiest race the state has ever seen. It is hyper-personal on both sides. Friendships, very long friendships, will be ruined and never recovered over this. That is like someone talking about a civil war. And that is what you're going to see, especially because there aren't major policy differences between Perdue and Kemp. All you're seeing from Perdue is him repeatedly, over and over again now, indicating in one way or another that he is going to be willing to cheat for Trump, where Kemp wasn't willing to cheat for Trump in 2020. And he keeps on doing this. I mean, he mentioned it repeatedly in his announcement, which it sounds like you played. But just today, he added more meat on that bone. And let me see if I can find the exact quote.
And while you're looking for that, the whole thing is pushing the big lie, which is actually what hurt him in the runoff. Like, the big lie hurt him. Trump's pushing of the big lie turned off people from voting in Georgia as well and helped galvanize Democrats.
Yeah, absolutely. And here he is saying Brian Kemp is the reason I lost my race. I mean, today he said that he wouldn't have certified the 2020 results. He told Axios that. He wouldn't have certified the 2020 results, and he would have called the state legislature back for a special session to fix what went wrong in the November election. Well, what went wrong in the November election is the fact that Democrats did well, Joe Biden beat Trump, and he ended up in a runoff against John Ossoff that he ultimately lost. So he didn't mention anything specific in terms of what he would have fixed. He just said he wouldn't have certified the results, and he didn't point to anything specific about what was wrong. Of course, the state had 3 recounts, one which was done by hand, and no evidence was turned up of fraud or irregularities in any sort of widespread way.
Yeah, and it's mind-boggling because Trump basically told Republicans you can't trust the vote, and so had Republicans in chaos. Democrats were galvanized, and now they'll be galvanized again because both Ossoff and Warnock ran on get the progressive base out, and that's Stacey Abrams, template, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought he really, just in that ad, it was tinged with racism to say, I'm going to do everything to make sure Stacey Abrams never becomes governor. We don't want to be California or New York. There was just something about that when you're talking about a black woman who's running that just reeks of racism.
Oh, totally. And he said, over my dead body will I let Stacey Abrams win this race. It's seething with, contempt for people of color and for what Abrams has accomplished there. And the fact of the matter is that he and Kemp are going to spend a lot of time tearing each other apart. And then you've got Abrams and Raphael Warnock, the first black man elected to the Senate in Georgia, who's going to be running for re-election, right? And the two of them, as a pair, are going to go out and campaign across that state, and they are going to be united. They are going to be probably very systematic in what they're doing. No one knows that state better than Abrams at this point. And it will be a force while Republicans are eating each other alive.
Yeah, and then speaking of that, we get to the House, where Republicans are eating each other alive already. um, you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene attacking Nancy Mace. Nobody wants to speak out against Lauren Boebert, but then we had Dan Crenshaw now calling the Freedom Caucus grifters. Again, I will get to the thing about the media. I don't see Republicans in chaos, Republicans in disaster. I just still see Democrats in disarray. When it's the Republican Party that now is in a mess, the leadership just doesn't want to do anything about these people who are extremist.
What is happening in the Republican caucus right now, and especially among House Republicans, is what happens when you have a total dearth of moral leadership, right? And anyone who has had kids knows that if you let kids sort of run wild and control you, they will take over the joint when they're younger, and they will do anything they want, and you will be at their behest. You will be begging them to sort of, do whatever it is that you want them to do. That's basically where McCarthy is now, right? He isn't putting any firm guardrails in place. He's not putting any boundaries in place. He's not saying what is unacceptable for his caucus because he's so desperate for every single vote he can get in order to, ultimately become speaker if Republicans take the majority next year. And at the same time, while he's doing this, while he's letting them run wild and just, total moral bankruptcy, he is already probably on the chopping block. I mean,
right.
You've already had someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene say he's failed us, and she's already indicating that he's not going to be their guy. A lot of people think Jim Jordan is going to be their guy if Republicans take majority.
Yeah, he will be leading the party as the leader, and the committees will be Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Madison Cawthorn. I mean, this is like a horror show from hell.
Yeah, it's so frightening. And to your point about the coverage, I mean, it is truly frightening. I want to underscore that because I don't want to just brush past it, right? But to your point about the media coverage, if Democrats can just pass the Build Back Better bill, and there are more things to be done. Most specifically the Voting Rights Act, some sort of Voting Rights Act, some version of a Voting Rights Act that can hopefully protect our democracy, right? But if they can pass the Build Back Better bill and be done with that, and be done, because Democrats are basically united on voting rights, it's a matter of whether or not they'll undo the filibuster or find some sort of carve out for the filibuster. But they need to quit legislating on Build Back Better and these things that have produced a lot of infighting. I want them to get it done. I'm not saying they should quit legislating before they get it done. They need to get it done. And then they need to let reporters get back to seeing what a total dumpster fire Republicans are. They need to spend time redirecting the energy of reporters to the dumpster fire that is the Republican Party right now. And Nancy Pelosi has modeled some of this, Speaker of the House. She just last week said, you're asking me about what our message is when Republicans are saying they want to kill the government funding bill because they don't want people to get vaccines. And that's terrible for the Republicans. And she's trying to tell reporters, look, you're kind of missing the story here. She's going to have a lot more opportunity, and Democrats are going to have a lot more opportunity to say that to reporters over and over and over again if they can get the Build Back Better bill behind them, which is not a perfect bill, but it's a good bill, and it's something Democrats can really run on, and damned if our climate doesn't need it.
So true. So true. Kerry, always great having you on. Always great to break things down with you. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, and thank you to your listeners. Happy holidays to all of them.
You too. Happy holidays to you. Kerry Eleveld, Daily Kos writer. Follow her on Twitter at Kerry Eleveld, Eleveld. We're back in a few minutes.
This is the Michelangelo Signorile Show on Sirius XM.